All right, welcome back to the RAHAB podcast. RAHAB has been serving victims of sex trafficking since 2002, which is long before anyone really even knew what sex trafficking was, at least in Ohio. The point behind this podcast is to share the truth about what sex trafficking actually looks like and encourage everyone who listens to be part of the solution. At RAHAB, we believe that there is a reason for hope. There's actually a reason to believe that on an individual level, people can heal and recover. And on a community and societal level, we can actually see the end of sex trafficking. Now, we've got some really amazing and new things in store for the RAHAB podcast in 2020, so stay tuned. But first, we have to finish out this year strong. My conversation today is with the CEO and visionary leader of RAHAB Ministries, Suzanne Lewis-Johnson. Suzanne, how's it going?
It's good.
Really good?
It's exciting.
It is. So tell me, now you've been out of the FBI for over a year and a half, working in nonprofit. How's it going?
I love it.
Do you really?
I do.
You're not just saying that?
No, I really love it. I miss a lot about where I was.
Weren't you just at something that you were like...
spending my morning with law enforcement, and that was exciting to be back with that group of folks. But as I shared with them, I really believe I can do more from here than I could from there in law enforcement. So I do miss it.
That was always the motivator for the change, right?
Right. I wasn't looking to leave law enforcement.
Just to get out.
There's so much about it that I loved, and I would have stayed on in the FBI had it not been for this really unique opportunity. And we had the opportunity to talk a little this morning with these guys that I was with about just the challenges that you have as law enforcement, and that people expect, at least this is certainly the perception if you are part of law enforcement, people expect you to be the answer. And law enforcement can't be everywhere all the time, can't be the solution to everything, that it really does take a community. So of course, we were doing a training that was specific to human trafficking, and law enforcement's job is to investigate and work the cases, and yet what they're finding is there's a need for someone to walk alongside those who are being trafficked in relationship. Law enforcement doesn't have the resources that I believe they need even to work all of the cases that are coming to them.
Is their role even to walk alongside?
Exactly. That's our role. And so, but they can't do their piece if there isn't someone who's filling that gap.
Right, because you just fall right back into it again if there's no one to walk it out with them.
Right.
And so there's actually been this message, or I don't know what you want to call it, that you have about law enforcement that they're not the answer alone.
Right.
And so that could kind of come off harsh sometimes, or the worry or the concern is that it can come off harsh. But it sounds like this morning in that training, it was actually like an empowering and a unifying message between us and law enforcement.
So yeah, it was a training, but it was a great conversation where I was hearing from them, and they even said, well, can we call you? Who do we call? And they
You gave them all your cell phone number?
I didn't. I said,
for everybody listening, it's no, I don't have it memorized.
They asked if they could call us, asked about expansion of our programming and advocacy. And so there's clearly a need. I mean, it was just really confirming of where I believe that we are called to go into more communities, just expanding the areas where we are on the ground and the resources that we are able to offer. That we have this extraordinary staff who is walking alongside folks, and who have for years and years and years, even if they're not the ones who were here for the last 17 years. I think you're the one that said it so well, and maybe you can do that again here. But in one of our staff meetings, you were talking about this DNA and how it sort of transfers over time.
Yeah, like an organizational experience.
Yeah. And so to be able to bring that into a situation, for us to be able to offer that in other communities and in that relationship is something that's crucial, and we're being asked to do in more places.
So you said something about the advocates. Do you see in RAHAB's future us having like advocates that will go out on site, or either to hospitals or like alongside first responders, or do you think that there are agencies that do that we would partner with or collaborate with, or
Both.
do you have, okay.
Both. I think it depends on the community. That some of the more rural places where the larger agencies don't serve still have a need, because trafficking happens everywhere, and that's one of the myths, is that it only happens in certain places or more urban places, or there's just, you know, maybe in more rural places that you see forced labor, but you don't see sex trafficking. That's just not true.
Right. So we tend to be, I love that you said it's going great. That's encouraging. But we tend to be hyper focused on the issue of human trafficking, just as a nature of our job, not just we like you and I, but at Rahab. And so all day, every day. So do you personally, do you ever find it hard to integrate kind of this reality of this horrifying truth back into like your normal everyday interactions? And then on top of that, like you had all those years with the FBI too. Like, is it just, how do you cross that bridge between like doing this work every single day, hearing these horrifying things, seeing the worst of the worst, and then kind of trying to live back in, you know, what would be quote unquote like normal life?
Do your life.
Yeah. Have you figured that out? And is it different at Rahab than it was when you worked in the FBI?
There's a lot in that question. What do you think?
What do I
I'm
think?
trying to buy time.
I don't know. You can have all the time you want. I mean, I'm finding more and more challenging, you know, bridging that gap. And I'm not at the houses. I'm not on the streets. I'm not working, you know, hand in hand with the women. But I think that as you start to see more, that divide starts to get bigger. And so that's why I ask you, because you've seen even way more.
Yeah. I don't know if this is really going to the heart of your question, but I remember a time in the Bureau where there was a particular type of work that I was doing that was part of this, that you couldn't be required to do, that it had to be done on a voluntary basis. And they put a lot of pieces, or at least tried to put a lot of checks and balances in there to ensure that you were doing all right, because you had to live your normal life, but also see the ugliest, darkest of things. And I remember being asked, how do you do this? How do you reconcile those pieces or move from one part to the other? And really it boiled down for me to, there is something you sacrifice of yourself to do that work.
True.
There's just something that you're going to sacrifice that's going to be different. And recognizing that, though, gave me some freedom, that it's not normal. What we do is not normal. Maybe it should be. Maybe there are those who don't want to see the ugly things that we see.
But is normal blinded? Because I don't want to go. I don't want to go there.
Yes.
Right. And so
yeah, I think it is blinded.
So, should there even be a desire, I guess, to try to live both sides? I don't think there is.
Right. Yeah, I can't really. It's not that for me, I don't move from one place to the other. It's just life. And we just keep going.
Maybe the divide will get so big that there's not this like human trafficking reality and then other reality, but like there's this maybe this kind of universal brokenness that we can get an understanding of, so that you're not, or that I'm not, or that none of our volunteers, our employees, are trying to vacillate back between, you know, re-entering back into normal life and, you know, back into Rahab life, normal life and Rahab life. And I think I'm still trying to figure out how to do that healthy.
I think you hit on something really crucial there, that brokenness is in all of the places. And we tend to sometimes look at what we see here as if it is such an extreme. And it is. I mean, there are really horrific things that we're dealing with here. But maybe one of the challenges, too, for a lot of those who volunteer or on staff or really get into the work in any sense, is you have to confront your own brokenness and your own story. And everybody has a story, and everyone has brokenness. So perhaps it's exactly that you don't move back and forth, that we shouldn't be moving back and forth, because this is the story that Christ came to step into for us, for all of us, whether the brokenness and captivity looks like sex trafficking or something different. And you're right, you can't avoid it here or be blind to it.
So maybe the question is not how do you live in both worlds or both perspectives or jump back and forth. Maybe it's how do you stay healthy when you start to take on more or learn more or your eyes are open to more. Mm-hmm. And so as you have a family, like as you know, and you have seen some stuff, like how do you stay healthy?
Just go to the cross. I mean, I don't know any other answer than just, you don't have to carry all of that.
Right.
Because he came to carry it, and continuing to have that perspective that we're just joining in God's work.
Yeah.
So we're doing the work, but really he's doing the work, and we're just stepping into it with him.
Yeah.
And even the broken things, we can't fix them on our own.
That's worked well for you?
That perspective?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I've had, especially in the Bureau, knowing that I really had my eyes opened there to the extent of the depravity and the brokenness. And I think prior to going into the FBI really made my judgment on how broken the world is by the headlines. And so once I had my eyes opened to that, I lived from a different perspective. That yes, we're called to do good. We should be making a difference every day that we're here on this earth. But really, there is more evil in this world than what we even know. We're just in a place where we have an opportunity to see it. But that also says to me, if evil is a thing, good is a thing. That we can even recognize the evil. For me, that just opened my eyes to how good God is, which is maybe a different perspective than what a lot of folks have had on that I've, people struggle with that. I'm not saying I haven't struggled with the pain and the darkness in the world, but I also know if this is true, the opposite is true, and the good is so much greater, and that you can recognize it, that you have the opportunity to be a part of how God is moving and how he's showing up in those places. That's what we see at Rahab more than I saw in the Bureau, is just the opportunity to see God lavishing his love on folks that are broken, and to see that there is hope. I don't know if you could recognize love and hope if there weren't a need for it.
And you were concerned at one point that you would see less of God coming to Rahab than you did. I mean, you said it.
No, it's true, because I did see it, because my eyes were so opened when I was in the Bureau. I really thought, could there be more than this? Because I had such extraordinary opportunities to walk into situations that I wouldn't have otherwise, and yet I've just seen God continually show up here, which is
it's interesting that you bring that kind of line up of, if there's this much bad, like how much brighter is the good, whereas it seems like that's the issue that a lot of people fall the other way on and say, like, look at all this, look at how bad things are. That how could there be a good God if there's war? How could there be a good God if there's sex trafficking? How could there be a good God if there's all this hate? And so it's just, I don't know if I have a comment on it, more than it's just stuck out to me that thing that people will say they don't believe in God over seems to be the same thing that you find God in.
Yeah, I think it boiled down to me to recognizing, I see the depravity, I see the ugliness, but if I recognize who God is, the God of the universe, the King, the creator of the universe, all powerful, all knowing, the only one who really knows the extent of how bad it is, took on flesh and stepped down into this mess. So as bad as I think it is, or whatever I've experienced or I've seen that somebody else has experienced, I mean, that is love, that he would step down into all of that with us. That is good, and that is love. And that's what we're called to do then, is we respond by living that same love, by stepping into the mess. I can't fully wrap my head around it. I've also had to just come to terms with, there are things that I don't understand, but I know he is good, because if he weren't good and if he weren't loving, he wouldn't come and walk in this world and surrender himself for us.
Yeah. I hope some people are listening. So you said that it's been great.
Yeah.
Year and a half or a little bit more, it's been great. What are some of can you remember some highs? Like this can't even be real type moments from the last year and a half?
I think my favorite moment was one of my favorite moments. I can't even say what my favorite moment was.
That's a really hard question. That's why I didn't say what's your favorite, because you have to choose one, but like, what are some of them?
So what immediately pops into my mind is, it was amazing that Attorney General Yost came to visit us. I think one of my favorite moments, though, was when he told Angel that he was proud of her. She loved that so much. It meant so much to her.
She's told the story like probably 15 times. Yeah. I've told it like 15 times.
So, I mean, you never could have planned something like that, but that was incredible. And just, it's neat to just be able to see those things and to be part of them. So, yeah. What about for you?
I don't even know. I feel like they just happen so quickly, like so rapidly. There's always like a God thing happening. So I don't have one in my back pocket. Like, I'm not prepared to answer this. So if I just think about it for a second, I don't know, maybe just the reality of having Rebecca's Place open. It's not like a moment. It's not like a moment type thing, but just the fact that it's now up and running, and people from all over the state are looking at it and saying that things like this don't exist other places, and just knowing like all of the sacrifice that some of our staff put into that. And I don't really think that they understand it yet, because they're so close to it. And they obviously understand so much about Rebecca's Place that I don't understand, because they're so close to it. But from a different perspective, I think that they're doing something that's groundbreaking, that's like pioneering, that's going to be an example to so many other groups and so many other states. And it's really, really hard work, and they're like sacrificing to make it happen. But the fact that, there are girls that had nowhere else to go, that got to live in this beautiful home and have these staff that care for them and have their perspective on life, not just different aspects of life, but their entire life changed, like that they're actually worth all of that, and that staff would show up and care about them, and they can curse a staff out and the staff's not going to hold a grudge, and just all of those little things that happen on a day-to-day basis out there, kind of coming together as this thing that I think is bigger than really any of us really know right now. Rebecca's Place is a huge deal, and it's almost like you can look at a lot of different areas of Rahab and see that model or that blueprint, and how God's woven it together for something way bigger than I think I understand right now. So that was a huge deal, seeing Rebecca's Place filled, not just built, but filled. And I think just all of the ways that God puts the Stark County thing together, just all of the relationships, all of the provision, just it's been amazing. And so in all these different ways, whether it's this Stark County thing, whether it's Rebecca's Place, or all the other million things that have happened, like we have truly over the last year and a half sat back and watched God conduct this whole thing in ways that we couldn't you couldn't put a team together to make these things happen. It's just, you work in excellence as much as you can every day, and you listen, you pray, and you go.
So what do you think, what are the keys to success? If that's success, is that success? There's something different about this place. What makes it different?
About Rahab?
Yes. And Rebecca's place.
I think that there's a lot that's different. I mean, it's probably bad form to have the CEO and the COO sit around and talk about why Rahab's the best, but I think that just the longevity of Rahab, the history, the intentionality behind every single meeting, every single day, it's not routine. It's, seeking the Lord and saying, God, what do you want for this person in front of me today? What do you want for this program? Going into a meeting and saying, God, I need the wisdom to make the right decisions in this meeting. I'm letting God lead and do his thing. And so he's tapped Rahab to be this organization for this time and for however many years to come, and be this example and set out the blueprint for other agencies to do it. But, if we try to veer off of what he's doing, then, we're not going to stand alone for a long time, I don't think. So I don't know if Rahab's successful. I think I'm like, oh Lord, we got a lot to do, but I think that it's exciting to kind of ride this wave right now, because I think it's a lot of stuff that people did in private for a lot of years at Rahab before I even got here, kind of growing and bearing fruit.
Yeah, like we reap a harvest. I feel all the time like I'm here to reap a harvest, but I wasn't the one who did the planting.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like that. It's the faithfulness and knowing that we're just stewards. I don't feel bad sitting here as the CEO talking about it, because I can't take any responsibility
That's
for
legit.
it. It wasn't me.
Yeah,
So I guess you're right. That could seem not so great, but I don't feel like I had a part in it. That I have this amazing privilege, and that's why I said earlier, I love it.
Yeah, that's
I think
true.
I came in thinking it was more of my responsibility than what it is, which sounds a little...
Well, that's relieving.
Odd. I mean, I still have great responsibility, but just knowing that we have these extraordinary staff, volunteers, like God has truly called people to do this work, and it rests on being faithful to him and hearing him.
Well, if you're going to go back to the whole, like, you're reaping a harvest that you didn't sow, like now you do have a responsibility. And so
to be sowing,
you've got to, what of this harvest do you share? What of it is it for sustenance for Rahab, and what of it is to plant again, because other crop doesn't just come up.
Right.
So maybe you weren't responsible, but you definitely are responsible.
Yeah, and you were here for 5 years, so that's as longer maybe than other NGOs or ministries. Like, that's a long time. You've said before, it's a long time in Rahab years. It is a long time, even in to be working in human trafficking as a nonprofit. So, like, what have you seen? Have you seen changes over that 5 years, or?
Honestly, at Rahab, obviously you're growing and you're collaborating with new people, and you're growing as an organization with your understanding of how to best serve the women and children. But the DNA of Rahab hasn't changed. Like, the why behind what we're doing hasn't changed. Our motivation for why we do the work we do has not changed. And so some things have changed, but really the stuff that matters hasn't changed at all at Rahab. What have been the hardest parts?
Well, I think, as I said, it rests on our faithfulness, right? And just that daily surrender, that can be hard. Like, you asked the question, I think, about moving between the different parts of life and the Bureau and here. And I thought I surrendered a lot when I left the Bureau, when I left my dream job to come
Yeah,
here.
what a sacrifice, right?
But I'm recognizing there's always something more. Like, the Lord really requires everything, which is not unreasonable. I mean, he laid down his life for me, but just constantly having to surrender and die to self. And I think truly our success, to use that word, does depend on that. That's where my responsibility is, right, as a leader. And so that's been the hardest thing. That's not a normal answer, but that's the true answer, is just constantly walking in obedience, even when it's hard things.
So if it's been 18 months, let's just call it 18 months, where in that was the hardest? Halfway in? 6 months in? Has we not gotten there yet?
Oh gosh, I hope we've been through it. I don't know. And there's other hard things too. I mean, gosh, there's challenges that we're going to continue to walk through. For sure, the funding is a challenge that, I trust that the Lord's going to provide however he will. But truly, if you stop and think about it, the government funding we receive has been cut across the board for everyone, and we're told to expect more cuts. And so if you don't walk in faith and you just walk in what you see right in front of you, that's
over.
A bit of a challenge. Yes. It's
From a
over
financial
for us
perspective,
and everybody else.
It's literally like you're taking a step and expecting the ground to show up there.
Right.
And then the next step, you got to do the same thing. It's like every single step, it's like, is there going to be solid ground there? Like that's the truth, not to be like oversharing, but that's the truth about
right. No, it's true. And so far the ground's showed up.
Oh yeah, every time in like really cool ways.
And through the government, that's crazy, because I left the government saying the government's not the answer. And then, I don't know. I mean, God has such a sense of humor too. I feel like that then the bulk of our funding to get Rebecca's Place opened came through government funding. It doesn't cover all of our ministry. I think that's a myth that's out there, is because we receive government funding that we're golden, and we're grateful, so grateful, because we wouldn't have gotten our doors open. But we've got to be able to supplement that, and then maybe in the next year fully fund outside of the government. That's a big challenge on the horizon. Mm-hmm. But
so that's an argument for maybe it not happening yet. You know, in the,
that's what I'm just that's what I'm thinking. Maybe. But I'm hopeful that
You good?
Yeah,
you're good.
I don't know what I was gonna say.
I'm moving around, probably distracted you. I think that one of the things that always stood out to me from Becky, and same with you, is that I think maybe it's as part of being a leader, or a leader in ministry. Maybe, I don't know if it works this way outside of ministry or a faith kind of situation. But Becky and you both live with a degree of faith that almost forces everybody else to be in that place of faith.
What does that feel like?
Well, I think it's like a version of discipleship and mentorship. It doesn't matter what it feels like. And so I think that I bring that up because of financial, we don't make decisions at the end of the day based on what the bottom line is, which is completely counterintuitive to running an organization with 50 plus employees or multi-million-dollar budget. And so it's not just a finance thing, it's a everything thing, but it really rears its head in the financials, where you've got to make a decision that's going to affect a lot of people's lives and a lot of people's families. And so it really, at the end of the day, is probably putting a magnifying glass on the leader's faith level. And then that's going to come under scrutiny for good and for bad. And then everybody else is like, this is where we're going. This is the direction the ship's going. And so you almost have this, we get the privilege of having our faith kind of like supercharged or grow quicker because
We don't just spend or decide to go in certain directions and that God's going to provide. We watch and we see where he's working. I think if there's so much need in front of us, that's certainly a challenge too, is to know there's need, that there's doors open and we don't have the green light to go through. That if we had the money, we would be there. So that's sort of is that a
That's
paradox?
a good point.
That we're stepping in faith in certain areas where we know we're supposed to be and to be going. And there's a lot of organizations out there, faith-based and not, that are funded through VOCA, and they're kind of in the same boat in a sense that we are, and yet we're a ministry and we're different. We have those pieces, and then we have other pieces that are fully funded by private donations or churches, and doors are open for us to go places and take the gospel, and yet we don't have the provision in those places yet.
Well, you say something that's really interesting. Like, is the timing of our provision how God is helping chart our course? Like, so what's harder? Is it harder to make decisions not knowing if the finances are going to be there, like in faith, or is it harder to have excess cash and make the right decision? Like, I think that it sounds like
I haven't had excess cash,
right? So. But I haven't even thought about it that way before.
Yeah.
Like, what if you had pretty much like unlimited funding and you saw the need? Like, would we jump in too far ahead? Would you don't know. There's obviously, I guess there's pitfalls on both sides of that.
But nobody ever knows.
Well. Who knows those problems? I don't know who's had those problems.
Oh. Maybe
too much cash, not know what to do with it. Man. Yeah, that's interesting. And so maybe it's a blessing that we're just still trying to figure out. So I asked you about hardest part. I guess it's a kind of an unfair question to just spring on you.
Right now it's your turn.
My hardest part?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Hardest part. I have a really short-term memory. So I think that sometimes things might have been way harder and I just forgot about them, or think back about them. We were just talking about this before we started recording. Was that even really that hard, or was that bad? But I think processing through those VOCA cuts was pretty challenging.
Yeah.
How that would affect specific people. And then ultimately we got to a different place, of faith. And so I think it really helped stretch us. I think, and you got to hear this the right way. Some people will hear it the wrong way, but you got to hear it the right way. I think getting VOCA it wasn't the worst. Obviously, it's in a lot of ways the best. But when it comes down to executing a hard or a challenging task, I think getting VOCA was extremely hard because you go from, this was obviously last year, not this current year, but going from having no government dollars to, the grant size that we were awarded, which was huge compared to what we had before, which was zero. It wasn't all that we needed, but it was a lot of money. And just having people who had experience in that telling us, you can't do this. Like, people
tell us that a lot. You can't do this. And then it happens, whatever it is.
Not like you can't, like you shouldn't, but you can't, like you cannot succeed in this, going from zero to like all the just everything that needed to be done to account for every single cent of that grant was huge. But that's like a really office-y administrative answer to that question. What's the hardest? I'm sure that if you asked Leah or Alicia or, Elaine or Jenna or whoever, they'd have a different answer. But just different. So you said, you used this word earlier, you said motivation. What is your motivation? So you go from 10 years, you work for the FBI for 10 years, then you leave there. Now every single day, every single minute, you're doing something regarding RAHAB and human trafficking. And so what is your motivator? And do you think you'll do work like this forever?
Jesus.
Okay, so that's answer 1A.
It's just Jesus, and I'll go wherever he calls me to go. It's just hearing his voice and knowing where he's called me to go, not go. So
you could be done tomorrow. Probably not, though.
probably not.
When did you learn about when was the first time you heard the term human trafficking?
I don't know if it was the first time I heard the term, but when I really first got exposed to what it was, I was at the Dallas Crimes Against Children conference.
Oh, that's why you love that conference so much.
New FBI agent, and
it's part of the story.
There was a documentary. I don't remember the name of the documentary. I wish I did. That was shown one evening. It was just optional outside of the workshops and
you're doing all the extracurricular activities and stuff, getting all your extra credit.
Yep, that's me.
Yeah.
And so I went and was just blown away. And from that point on, I was in, and what I came to recognize was that a lot of what I'd been seeing was trafficking. It is very complex, and it is a hidden crime that intersects with a lot of other things. So then once I started watching for it, then I came to recognize it. And so did the community. The more that we started to talk about it, I think that was 2008.
Is that when the whole human trafficking thing started becoming popular?
I really don't know.
Because that term started to become a buzz term, right? Was it around then, or?
I don't remember hearing it, but I could have not been paying attention. Really, I don't know. That's just the first that I encountered it. I mean, it wasn't part of any training that I had received as a new agent going through Quantico. It wasn't something I was educated on at all until I went to that conference, and then I sought to learn more and connect with those who knew something about it. And most of what I learned, I just learned from being on the ground or from colleagues.
So did the terminology, was it just providing language to something you already knew?
Are you drawing a parallel to Becky? I don't think, not in that way, probably.
No, not at all.
What I knew was I was working crimes against children. And so I knew about child exploitation. In those cases, some of those cases I worked, for sure you could make an argument that they were also human trafficking. So in that way, maybe yes. It didn't, this also may not come across the right way, but it didn't make a difference in terms of prosecution. It's easier a lot of times, and the penalty is the same to prosecute certain types of child exploitation where your victim doesn't have to testify.
Yeah.
So you don't charge human trafficking because you don't want to re-victimize the victim. Getting up on the stand and testifying and having to face the person who trafficked you is trauma all over again. And so where that can be avoided, that's a good thing. So in those instances, I don't go back and think, oh, if only we'd prosecuted it as, or
right.
recognized it. You want to recognize so that you can intervene and respond appropriately.
All right, so let's wipe it all clean. The laws, they're clean. How would you write the trafficking of persons or the human trafficking law? What would the penalties be? Would would the victim have to be face to face with the with their trafficker? What are you laughing about?
That's a terrible question.
Why?
There's just, it's not a terrible
because
question.
You're saying before human trafficking even was a thing, it didn't matter in the child exploitation stuff because they were getting the same penalty anyway, and they didn't have to re-traumatize them.
Well, in my cases that I was working, you still need good human trafficking laws.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard you say that. You need good human trafficking laws. So what are the good human trafficking laws? Do we have them?
They're getting better. Sometimes the law is helpful. Sometimes we try to make things better and we do harm just because it's so complex and there isn't necessarily a recognition of how different factors interplay or how traffickers work or what really enables law enforcement to collect evidence that can be put on the record. You can write laws that look great on the surface, but if they can't actually be enforced. If you can't collect evidence that meets the elements, then they really don't do anything. So
all right, so
I think we
so
need
the
to
record
look
is
at the.
clean again.
We need to look. I can't. I'm not going to
No,
answer
we're doing no,
that
we're
whole.
no, no, no.
Okay.
We're gonna do another experiment
like
with it.
that's
Though.
a long conversation.
All right, we're gonna do another experiment with it though. So it's gone. You have to write the human trafficking law. Not how would you write it? Who would you get? Who would you ask and like look for input from? Who needs to inform these types of things? If you can write a law that looks great on paper that might be challenging when it actually comes down to the practical world, then who needs to be part of that discussion so you make sure that the things that are on paper are look good on paper and good in practice?
Well, the folks doing the work on the ground, and probably those who have been trafficked too, giving them a voice, because there's all the cases that have been investigated, that have been prosecuted, but most of them haven't been. Most of them, law enforcement maybe have never even known about. And so, there was an organization that put out some data on, they said, all of the human trafficking cases in the United States. And they showed that one particular internet service provider was prevalent in those cases. And so the thought was, well, if we do away with that provider, then
problem solved.
Yes, we've solved the problem. Well, the reality was that particular provider was very cooperative, and that it was easy to collect evidence there. So that's why they popped up in all these cases, because those were the cases that were getting prosecuted. So then you missed all of the other cases, and law enforcement officers who were investigating those cases could have said, you missed this whole piece. But I don't think they were I know they weren't part of that conversation, that was made from folks who were a little bit removed and who did have some experience doing prosecutions and did great work, but we're just missing some of the perspective. The same would happen if you just had law enforcement who were writing the rules, right? That you need both of those perspectives, but then you need the perspective that's completely outside of law enforcement too. So I think it would take some time to really identify everyone who should be part of that. We were somewhere the other day, actually, planning for a conference, and I remember someone was saying there needs to be a think tank, and for some reason that came back to me this morning. Who would be part of a think tank?
I thought that was a good idea.
It's a great idea, isn't it? But then I thought,
and what a great next step. What a refreshing next step after a conference. At least that's what I thought in the moment, but you look like you might have a different perspective.
No, I think it's great. But what I was going to say was, look at RAHAB and look at all the perspectives that we have here. We have the social workers, we have the survivors, we have law enforcement. I'm not the only one who comes from that background. And so you have almost that think tank, but you have folks who the majority are doing the work on the ground, the direct services. And so one of the pieces that can be concerning, if you're a think tank, if you're not really invested in the work, you might not know all of the critical questions to ask. And that's at the heart of it, is we might have good, solid information that we're bringing to the table, but what are we missing? We need to be able to ask the right questions so that we can put all of those perspectives together and get to the right answers. Because you're not getting the right answers if you're not asking the right questions.
Yeah, think tank just for a think tank's purpose isn't going to solve any problems if you just got a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, so I love it. How do you take it to that next
Same question
step?
though, how do you get the right people in the conversation?
Yeah, we'll get there.
You think?
Well, hope so.
Yeah. Is that one of your action items?
Yes.
Cool. You said something that triggered something in my mind. It was talking about that one particular internet provider and how they kind of rose to the top of those searches because maybe they were part of a lot of the prosecutions or whatever. So we've got all these stats out about human trafficking, and some of them are accurate and some of them are way off. And I think that that's kind of how it is with national statistics, probably on a lot of things. It's hard to get good data, but especially in this case with human trafficking. But when you said that, okay, so if you have somebody who is, if I was robbed going to my car, someone shows up on me, pulls a gun, robs me, and they never get prosecuted and I never go to the cops, was I still robbed? clearly, right? Clearly I was robbed. And so when we're going to look at an issue like sex trafficking, which is totally, different and worse and more traumatic in a lot of ways than being robbed, just because there's no prosecution doesn't mean that the thing isn't happening.
Right.
And so you've got all these stats that are being either projected or stats that are based off prosecutions, but we're missing, like we've got, then in Rahab, we have in the last 3 months or in the last quarter, we had 266 adult women come through our drop-in center, all of which are either victims or super high risk and vulnerable to being victims. And those aren't duplicates. Those are all different women, 266. How do we, as Rahab and other organizations that might be interfacing with the women that we serve too, how do we start to change that conversation? So how do we start to add these things, these stats to the national conversation? Is it valuable for us to even do that? What's to gain from it? How do we, and then what are the things you think we're going to come up against, like either a different guard or that may not want to hear the information that we're bringing forth? Because you believe that that's part of our role, part of our calling, right? Is to
speak truth.
To speak truth into the national or even the international discussion, right?
Yeah. I don't know exactly what that looks like. I think there are a lot of folks who want to have a voice. It's kind of a trendy topic.
How much longer do you think it'll be trendy for?
I don't know.
If you were to guess.
I couldn't even guess. I mean, my soapbox about it is that it's the story of all of time. So it shouldn't go away. I'm grateful that there's recognition of it. I'm grateful that there are a lot of folks who are now wanting to speak into what is happening. I just really am passionate about the information being accurate and based on truth. And that's something I'm trying to wrestle through what it looks like. I don't even remember the question anymore. I'm just kind of going down the trail, but
that's fine.
What it looks like. How do you have that conversation with grace? I believe there are a lot of folks who are well motivated, but who aren't doing the work on the ground, who have solutions that look good on the surface, but are really sometimes even doing harm because they don't recognize the implications. Leah said the other day, she was talking about how at Rebecca's place, she's learned the smallest decision can have a
true.
big
I remember her saying that.
Impact. Mm-hmm. And that's true with the girls that we're working with there at Rebecca's place. And it's true on this broad scale as we're addressing trafficking with the policy and the laws. The tiniest little thing can have a giant unforeseen impact, and we really need to think through those things well and be able to come to the table and check the egos and just really care about the cause of freedom.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to ask the same question one after the next, but it's the same thing with building the laws, right? As it is with whoever's shaping the national conversation. Mm-hmm. It's like just getting the right information to the right places, I guess. And you believe that Rahab has a role to speak into both of those?
Probably. Yeah, I mean, that goes back to really just wanting to be obedient to where we're called. So I don't want to force myself through any doors where we're not supposed to be. There's a time to speak and a time to be silent. I've been here for 1.5 years. Some would say I've been silent, some not so much. You're making a face.
Who would say you've been silent?
You want to say that?
I guess I'm in the not so much category.
Well, you've heard me on my soapbox a lot. True. Internally. But as far as externally,
that's fair.
I haven't sought out really those opportunities.
No.
I want to make sure that it's solid information, and not just solid information, but somewhere that we're supposed to go. No doubt in my mind that we are meant to change the national narrative. As far, and I think you're right. I think policy is connected to that. It's different places. It's the government, it's the church, it's the community.
Mm-hmm.
I've said so many times, more than anything, this is the church's job to end trafficking. You cannot legislate the solution, that we need good laws, but that's not actually my primary focus. My primary focus is on
Speak to the church.
Mm-hmm. For people of faith to put faith into action, live what you say you believe. Going back to the beginning, this question about, I may not say it well, so you can clarify, but doing the Rahab thing and then doing the rest of life, that's hard. It's hard to strike the balance, and it is a sacrifice. But I believe those are the types of lives that we are called to live. And I think it's good for my kids, honestly, to see me living that type of life. Not that I walk it with perfection, but what if that's how we all in the church, again, not that I do it perfectly, but what if that was the type of life that we really were striving to live? Just a life of being like Christ, not the white picket fence life, not the put up our borders and boundaries and, we want to protect our families. We want to keep our kids safe. But what is safe? And thinking about eternal consequences. And I'm far more concerned about my children's eternal security than I am anything temporal. So going off on some tangents probably.
Yeah, I asked. And so Rahab's serving hundreds of women that are survivors of sex trafficking, even in a given year, women and kids. And some of those women and kids are very much still in those trafficking situations. So if they're not living at the safe house or they haven't found another safe place, women are coming to our drop-in centers. They're coming to, mentoring. The kids are, and they could be going right back into these situations. So Rahab's really, really connected with victims and survivors in a real relational way. But when you were at the FBI, you must have had even a closer connection to where they were right in the midst of that. Like, there must have been times where, like, you showed up, like, right when that person was just trafficked.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm sure that you still even remember, like, women's faces or parts of their stories. Mm-hmm. And so if you can get in that headspace, what did they need right then and there? Like, in that moment, what did they need?
Love. That's what everybody needs. More than anything, just to be seen, to know that they are seen, that they are not invisible, and that there are people willing to walk alongside of them, that they have value. All the things that you said, all of the things that Rahab does, that's what they needed. That's what brings freedom more than anything else.
And how would you define success for that individual?
How would I define success in terms of what Rahab does, or for them to be successful?
For them, yeah. What's success for them in that moment?
Probably recognizing that there's hope. Sometimes it's just when they live another day. But going back to eternal perspectives, it's having a hope.
Yeah. I think that, I know that the issue or the topic of defining success in this work is just this ongoing conversation, at least at Rahab. Like, how do we define success? We don't want to project success onto an individual. We want them to be able to determine what they were called to, what they were created for, and then be able to run after that. We want to give them the tools. We want to give them the confidence, the ability to go and do those things. But isn't success at, like, a real baseline level that they're not trafficked again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so if that's what
It's a
you're
low
getting at,
standard,
I thought
though,
you were
right?
asked with the
No, I was
FBI
asking
question,
you.
like in that moment.
I was
But
asking you that.
what I would say when I was in the bureau, because most of the cases weren't going to get to prosecution, was my objective really became offering them an opportunity to get out. It was connecting them to services like RAHAB. But yeah, you want to end that slavery, and we're in the business of setting people free, partnering with God to set people free physically and spiritually. So we don't want them to be trafficked, and we don't want them to be in spiritual captivity. I'd agree completely. That's success.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we've been asked that question so many times that I've in my answer or my non-answer sometimes, like I feel like I'm answering from a place that we're all assuming that we have the goal that they're not going to be trafficked again. But I don't think that some people even, I think that we might need to say that when people, not that that's, because that's like such a base level victory, I think, from our perspective of what the women that are coming to the safe house, or the girls that are going to Rebecca's place, or the mentoring or drop-in, like, we want so much more for them than to just come out of that physical bondage. And I'm not making light of their trafficking situation by any means, but I think just the fact that our vision for them is not even looking at that level of victory, like coming out of that it just shows that how much value they do have, and how much purpose there is on their life, and how much we really do believe that they can do anything that God's called them to do. And so there's this, we don't, you came in this program because you were trafficked. Yeah, we don't want that to ever happen again. Let's look at this other, look at what you've been called to do, and help you get there. I want to get to a definition of success that people maybe stop even seeing it as a human trafficking thing.
Stop seeing success as a human trafficking thing?
I don't know if
honestly,
more than a human trafficking issue, I think.
Yeah.
Which is what you've talked about at like a spiritual level. But I think that maybe what I mean to say is that, what do you think would happen if you took somebody who wasn't trafficked, and you put them in our programming? That's a loaded question.
I think they'd find freedom.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm trying to say. Like,
yeah.
I think that this is more than that, more than just trafficking. And so God's called us for a really specific thing. And there is such a story there of the fall and spiritual captivity and deception and all the things you talk about on a ongoing basis. And the physical captivity of human trafficking, the emotional bondage of human trafficking. But we need to get to a place at RAHAB where, when we're talking to someone who has no grip for what human trafficking is, that they can find the similarities in that emotional bondage, that deception, that lying, that brokenness, and understanding that the solution that we're offering to the survivors of sex trafficking is the same solution that they need. And we don't have a safe house for anybody who just needs a place to stay, but we do have a solution.
Yeah, I think that's where we're called to, is to speak into and tell that story.
So what is RAHAB's message?
Setting people free physically and spiritually.
New tagline. What's different? What makes RAHAB different than all of the other things that people are being told they should care about? Like, there's a lot of things out there that we should be caring about, and we do care about. And so if someone's listening, and like, what is there anything that would differentiate RAHAB, or are you just looking for someone to feel that specific call that's connecting them to it?
Both, I think. What would you say?
I don't know. I kind of started to answer my own question by saying that specific call thing, like what Sonia says. Like, if your heart is skipping a beat when you're listening to this, that's that there's something more happening. That's not a coincidence. It's not that you're just hearing a good story. It's that something is moving you into something that you've been called to. But you said both. So what would the first part of that be? What differentiates this?
Well, I really believe this is God's story, that God's story is setting people free physically and spiritually, that it's the story of all of Scripture. And there are a lot of things that people should care about. A lot of them intersect with trafficking. But when you read the Bible and you see the fall, you see that serpent slithering up to a woman and taking the truth a little bit off track, and all of humanity falls into captivity. That's what traffickers do. You see it, trafficking, it's playing out in the physical, but it is the story that played out in the spiritual. And then truth and love came down, took on flesh to set us free. Truth and love is the answer, whether it's the physical realm or the spiritual realm. And I think I truly believe that is what makes trafficking different, that God cares about all of these things. He tells us to care about the needs of our neighbor and just to love our neighbor. And we can do that in a lot of arenas. And there are a lot of other groups that we partner with in doing this work. So I don't mean to minimize what anyone else is doing, because I see huge value there. But the essence of our DNA, as we've talked about so many times, it's Jesus. It is living Christ. Even, we have these opportunities to live Christ to places, people we never thought we'd be able to go, even where we're not able to speak his name. We just live Jesus. And then that naturally leads to the question of why? What is different? Because there is something that's different here. And that's what it is. And it's living out that story. So I do believe that's different. I believe it's an opportunity for the church as and I say that I want to call the church, but we also see the church responding. We've had so many incredible just God things where doors have opened and folks have come to meet our need and partner with us in a giant way. So I see that happening, and I'm so encouraged. I just don't think the work is done.
Right.
That I mean that on a much broader scale. And it changes lives of those we serve. It also changes those of us who come into the work too. I think, Sonia just said.
Totally.
That when you're where God is moving, you draw closer to him.
Mm-hmm. So Rahab, setting people free spiritually and physically and spiritually. Is that what you said? There you go. 2020 tagline. That'll have to get through our communications department first.